Well, welcome everybody to Wapiti Live Q&A for February 14th, 2024. Happy Valentine's Day, everyone. Tonight is going to be, we're going to talk about my philosophy and my approach on elk calling. Um, I know it's been something that, we've kind of hit bits and pieces here and there, but I thought kind of having this discussion and throw everything in one place would make it easy for everybody. So definitely my calling philosophy has evolved over the years, which naturally it does. The more we hunt elk, the more encounters and the more experience we gain, we just kind of morph and tweak and change. And most people, well, actually, most people don't change. They keep doing the same thing year after year after year after year, and that's why you'll talk to somebody that have been like, oh man, I've been elk hunting for 8 9 years and I've never seen an elk. I have never heard an elk. And it's like, okay, what are you doing differently? Oh well, we hunt this place that my family's hunted for 45 years, and they get stuck on a spot. And I used to be that way early on in my career, especially when I moved to Idaho. I had a spot that I just absolutely loved. I mean, it was such a magical place. A lot of elk in it. Still has a lot of elk in it. Um, but it's kind of a challenge. I mean, it's 7 8 miles back in on at that time it was an ATV trail. Now it's a motorcycle trail. But it's just, I mean, the sights and sounds and smells back in there are just incredible, and never a lot of people. But I was so focused on that spot, and it wasn't until I got involved with the TV show that I started hunting other places in the state. And it's really cool because hunting different parts in your state, you have different topography. The way the trees are, the way the vegetation is, how steep and deep things are. And as I've kind of progressed, I kind of enjoy going into new areas because it's kind of that challenge of learning a new area and locating elk and being successful with it. And so that's one part that's changed. And my philosophy on your hunt area is don't fall in love with an area. So if you're in an area that you're just not seeing much elk sign in, maybe it used to be good, but for some reason elk have gotten pushed out. Could be a fire, could be pressure, could be encroachment on cabins and vacation rentals and people and all kinds of stuff. If something has changed in your area, move to a new area. Go find the elk. And it's a lot easier if you live in elk country to do that. Um, if you're out of state, I would say if you're out of state traveling to an elk state to hunt and you've gone to the same area 2 years in a row and haven't seen much sign, you need to cross that area off your list. I mean, especially for you guys that are coming back east, you're spending a ton of money and you're devoting a ton of time to drive out and hunt and do all that. Man, go find a spot where elk numbers are higher. Your chances of success and encounters are going to increase, and you're just going to have a much more enjoyable hunt. So my philosophy on elk calling, when I first started out, there really wasn't much philosophy. There was let's just go out and make some noise, and I could not use a diaphragm reed to save my life. I sucked at them. I thought they were the dumbest things in the world. I never thought I would be able to use them, and so I was an external guy. And in fact, my first couple of years in Idaho, I never even bugled. All I did was open read cow calls. It was the old Woodwise Hyper Hot, and the Primos 901 bite and blow, which that 901, that Primos call, I listen to it now and it's like, oh, how, how did this thing ever call in any elk? But I mean, you got to understand when that 901 was first produced, you're talking in a time that was early elk calling. I mean, there was guys that would take fluted pipe and coil it and blow on it. It would make this high pitched whistle, and elk would respond to it. I mean, the thing with those coils, there was absolutely no back pressure. You started blowing on that thing, and it seemed like that thing was actually sucking the air out of you. That I mean, within 2 seconds, you were completely out of air and exhausted and trying to get air back into your lungs. But it worked. So so early on, it was just all about cow sounds, and I really didn't call that much. I was more kind of spot and stalk type, get set up on trails for ambush, but also too, I mean, at that time I couldn't sit in one spot very long. So even though I would set up on a great game trail, come into a water, a wallow or a water source or a travel corridor, God, I could not sit there that long. So it was boots on the ground, cover miles. And early on, it was all about miles, because I figured the more miles that I put on, the more elk I was going to see, and the more elk I see, the more opportunities I was going to have. So then things kind of evolved. I kind of told myself, okay, I'm going to learn how to use a diaphragm reed, and I picked up some Primos diaphragm reeds, and I picked up the Primos Terminator, and I taught myself how to make cow sounds on a diaphragm reed. Um, and I taught myself how to use the Primos Terminator for bugling, but I still didn't bugle that much that first year until I was out there and I had bugled on that Primos, and I got a bunch of responses. Man, during the middle of that hunt, I made that switch. I abandoned cow calls, and it was all about the bugles. I mean, I bugled a ton. You guys hear stories about, man, it seemed like this person was bugling every 10 steps. That was me. That was me at that time. I mean, it was bugle, 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 and still covering a bunch of ground. Um, and did okay on that. And then that's really when the bug hit me. And then I really started studying elk and really studying vocalizations. And then that's when I really committed myself to learning that diaphragm read. But I still had that bugle mentality. And now we're talking, I'm in my late 20s at that point here in Idaho, and it was that bugle, that aggressive, man, I'm going to challenge everything to a fight, and they're either going to run to me or they're going to run over the top of the mountain, getting out of this canyon. But dang it, I'm going to challenge them. I'm going to be the biggest, baddest mofo on this mountain that I can be. And uh, again, success was okay. Um, one shot opportunity a year. That was it. One call in a year. Um, and I kind of spent about 3 to 5 years with that mentality of that aggressive, 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 aggressive. That um, just I would do a little location bugle, and it didn't matter if it was a full blown bugle back or just a little squeal. It was on. I was screaming at that guy, and I mean there would be times that I was working out in ton and in great shape, that man, I would get a response and I would just take off running towards him, and I'd be running towards him just bugling, just wah, as I'm running towards him, and I'm sure he's sitting over there going, "Oh, what's this guy's freaking problem? Why is he coming so fast?" All I did was say, "Hey," and all of a sudden he's coming over here all jacked up, steroid raging like he's just going to kick my butt. And by the time I got over there, there's nothing. You know, I blew them out. I don't know if they saw me running across the meadow or running up the other side or something or at that point I didn't know. I figured, oh, he saw me or this or that. It wasn't until, like I said, I had that approach about 3 to 5 years, and then into my 30s, mid 30s, I was still that same approach, still chasing elk and still getting aggressive, and um, I was back. I was back deep on a canyon, sitting up on a ridge. I knew the elk had been bedded down, and I looked back down the drainage to the mouth of it, and I saw some elk in this quakey patch about 100 yards below me in elevation, but all the way out on the end, and they were going down to a little creek to water during the middle of the day. And I was sitting there watching them, and I was like, I came screaming through those aspens this morning, and not a single thing responded to me. They had to have been there. Why? Why didn't they respond? And then that's when it kind of clicked that it was, hmm, how many elk am I going by that don't want to respond because of my aggressive approach, and I'm being too aggressive. And that was the same day that I kind of sat up there on that ridge and pondered for a little bit, and I dropped down in the bottom and went out through and went to camp during the midday, and was kind of sitting there. And this was the time that I hear a four-wheeler coming down the trail, and here comes this old timer rolling in on an old blue Kawasaki or Suzuki. I mean, it was an old four-wheeler. I mean, the seat was all ripped. You could see the inner foam on the seat, and it basically looked like he was riding on the metal frame, that there was no padding on the seat, and sitting there chit chatting with him, and he asked how things were going, and I kind of told him, and that's when he really laid the groundwork for me evolving on my philosophy, with elk. And he just looked at me and he said, he goes, you can't write a book for a story that hasn't happened yet. And I must have looked at him possible, puzzled, and he was like, do you understand what I'm saying? And I'm like, no, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. It doesn't make any sense. And he basically said each encounter with a bull is different. His mindset's going to be different. What he's looking for is going to be different. And that's going to change from week to week, day to day, and even hour to hour. I mean, you could encounter a bull in the morning, and then in the afternoon, he has a completely different mindset. So he goes, your one type approach, you're just, and he asked me, he goes, do you know how many elk that you're going by and just pushing out of the way? And all they're doing is they're just moving out of the way, letting you go right back, right through, and then they're coming right back into that area without even saying a word. And honestly, I didn't even go out hunting that evening. I just, we sat there and talked for probably another hour and a half, 2 hours, and then he took off, and I just sat there and just thought about that whole conversation. And I was like, holy crap, because it reiterated everything that I was thinking about when I was sitting up on that ridge about how many elk that I'm going by. And so that was the day that I'm like, okay, so how can I figure out what their mindset is? And so the next couple of days I started playing around where I would start off with a cow sound. I would start off just with a couple of mews and listen. And if I got a response, I kind of paid attention to how aggressive the response was, or what he was kind of. I was trying to figure out what he was saying. So, and then if I got a response on the cow sound, I'd bugle and see if I got a response back. if I did, again, I would pay attention to, okay, was it the same as the bugle that happened when I did the cow sound, or was it different? And so that's when I started paying attention, and really starting to put all this together, kind of. And then, I would move in on that bull. And again, I kind of like, okay, I'm going to play with some things. So if this dude answered to cow sounds but didn't answer to bugles, I'm just only going to do cow sounds when I move in on him. And vice versa. If he only answered to bugles but not to cow sounds, I'm only going to bugle at him when I moved in. And that's when it kind of started to evolve into the philosophy that I have now of taking that bull's temperature. A bull will tell you what he's looking for, whether he's looking for cows, whether he's looking to fight. Is he up moving, trolling around looking for cows? Is he bedded down, just kind of advertising his location? But that's where it all kind of started. Of, okay, I want to take this bull's temperature. I want to figure out what he's looking for. I want to find his hot buttons. That way I can adjust my calling. That's why within the blueprint, you see the breeding sequence, the inviting cow routine. I'm going to put a lost calf sequence, in there. And because having multiple different sequences at your disposal, now you have the ability to adjust what you're doing based on the information that you're getting from that bull. And as soon as I started doing this approach, my call-ins went from one per year to three or four or five. I mean, there's some years where I would have 6 shot opportunities in a season. And then, I mean, there's some people that, they consider it a great season if they have 1 shot opportunity. And now, since kind of changing that philosophy and that approach, it it's made it a lot more fun. The other thing with this too is it's not about gaining miles anymore. It's working areas, not running around looking for an elk to work, but it's working these areas. And I think it's kind of taught me that coupled of working the area plus with figuring out what that bull's hot button is, that's what has led to the increase in call-ins and shot opportunities. And same thing, the guys that I hunt with, I mean, when you've got 4 or 5 guys in a group and everybody gets 3 to 5 shot opportunities a year, that's a lot of elk you're calling in. That's a lot of opportunities. And it's not that we don't trophy hunt, have never trophy hunted. Me, I love the encounters. I love the interactions. And it's one of those things that I think too, it's made all of us in the group a lot calmer when elk do come in, because we let the situation develop. We don't try to rush the situation. It's not, okay, there's my shot opportunity, I need to take it now. But it may not be the optimum shot opportunity. And when you switch to that mindset of observing elk, you'll actually find that you end up that first shot opportunity that you get a lot when that bull comes in is not always the best one. I mean, I've had it where, elk have come in at 38, 39 yards, or maybe just past 40. And 40 is kind of my maximum effective range. And I've been sitting there going, I know my max range is 40, but that dude's at 44. I got to take this shot. And then it's like, no, just let it develop. He just barely came in. And by having that patient, that 44-yard shot has turned into a 12-yard completely broadside shot. So because of, allowing that bull to come in and scan and look for that elk that, he heard making that noise. So my philosophy approach now is take that bull's temperature. And um, multiple examples. Some of you guys have heard me talk about with Bryce when was calling for him on an evening, and I did a couple of just basic mews, and this bull just screamed down on the bottom. And when I bugled, he would answer really timid, and I did that a couple of times, and I immediately knew that this was a satellite bull. Um, had probably already gotten his butt kicked by the herd bull in the area, and he was responding to me because I was doing a location bugle, and he was just kind of like, yeah, I'm right here. It's okay if you stay up there and I stay down here because we have a lot of space in between us. And but when I do a cow sound, he'd be like, hey, yeah, um, yeah, I'll come see you. And so when we set up, all I did was cow sounds, and I pulled that bull from all the way in the bottom all the way up, for an 18-yard shot for Bryce. Had I done that early approach of just screaming at him, he would have never came out of that bottom. In fact, he eventually would have shut up. Never would have came out. And of course, if we tried to drop in down on him with thermals, it was bad. Um, other times, there's a 6 point down on the wall downstairs that um, that guy loved the breeding sequence. I mean, the year I got him, I called him in 3 times prior to getting that, and every time it was the breeding sequence. And that's the other kind of approach change is patience within the calling. Don't try to rush the situation, because early on I was all about that. It's like, man, the more I call, the more excited I get, the louder I get. It's just going to make him come in faster. No. An elk is going to come in when they want to come in. It's on their time. It doesn't matter what we do. Can't really speed that clock up. And so that was kind of a shift in my philosophy and approach also, was instead of trying to force the situation, and instead of focusing and calling on that bull, it was patience and focus on telling my story. Because that's what a calling sequence is. It's a story. You're painting a picture. And so the more patience that you can have, and the more you stay in your story, telling your story, that's realism. Because that's what happens out there with elk, especially if you're doing the breeding sequence. If you have an opportunity to sit there and listen to a bull that has a hot cow, his focus is on that hot cow. He only pays attention to those other bulls that are around him bugling when they get too close. Then he pushes them out to a safe distance, and then he's locked back in on that cow. So, okay. So the philosophy, patience, tell the story, and figure out that bull's hot button. Make sense so far?
Yes.
Any questions so far?
No, not for me. But that's one thing I've learned from you is be patient.
It's the hardest lesson to learn.
Oh, yeah, yeah, I'll go with that. It's so hard to not just like you said, jump into it and do it, but you just gotta, that's what I've done. Worked
We,
for me.
we've all done it, especially as new callers. We get in that we get in that mindset that we can speed that clock up, and in reality, you end up pushing the elk away. Whereas just that patience, and I mean, it took me several seasons.
Well, like you said earlier, you were sitting up there and you watched those elk come down the mountain and you just went through there and they didn't make a noise, but yet there they were right there.
You know what's funny is, so here's a funny story about that spot. So about three days later, I went back into that Quakey patch, and I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to blow through this area, because that's what I had done 5 6 years prior. was get across the creek, go across this flat, up that face, get through that aspen patch, and then whew, hang a right and back in the canyon I go. So just blew through there. So I'm like, I'm going to spend time in this aspen patch today. I'm just going to set up, do some calling, and just see what happens. And I mean, I hadn't heard a bugle, I hadn't seen an elk, but I just set up, kind of just doing a cow calf routine, just kind of, that they were just kind of milling around in that area. And then after, God, just not that long, I mean, 3, 4 minutes, that whole aspen patch lit up. I mean, there was cows and calves mewing and chirping back and forth. There was two bulls that were screaming. And I had just started shooting a thumb release at this time. And I mean, there was elk just running back and forth in this quaking patch. I mean, I had calves prancing, just running by me, and cows running in and by, and bulls, those two bulls screaming. I drew back 3 times, and I shot the ground about 5 feet in front of me 3 times, trying to let down with a thumb release. Because first time using a thumb release, don't put your thumb on the trigger when you're trying to let it down, because you will end up
No,
shooting. And each time I would pull that arrow out of the dirt and click it on my boot to knock the dirt off the broadhead and re-knock it. And 3 times I did that. Just, but it was just insane, the activity. I mean, I had gotten into a lot of bugling matches and screaming matches with bulls, but I had never experienced anything like this before. I mean, the amount of vocalizations and elk activity, and I mean, I'm sitting there or kneeling there, and I mean, 360 degrees, I could see elk just running and playing and talking and just having like a bunch of school kids out on a playground. And I'm stuck in the middle of all this. And it was one of the coolest experiences. I didn't shoot an elk on that setup. So probably by the third time of me shooting the ground 5 feet in front of me, they figured something was up and not quite right in the aspen patch. So, but I mean, it was so cool because when it all calmed down, I just kind of sat there and just took it all in and just replayed everything that I had just experienced and seen, and all the sounds, and that was kind of my first introduction or experience with herd talk, and the vocalizations of the mews and the chirps and the excitement level, and all that stuff. And it was so cool. And so I rolled down off the aspen patch, went back to camp, ate lunch, and then went back across the creek, because on this flat, there was the flat was the beginning of this canyon, and there was a creek that rolled through it, and then there was a natural mineral lick that, I mean, years and years of elk pond down on the ground that just stair stepped it and benched it, and I mean, so many elk tracks and deer tracks coming in. And so that evening, I picked one of the trails and went out back, and so I was kind of on the back edge of this flat, and there was that face to the left of me that went up to the aspen, and then you had the drainage that went right out in front of me, and on the right was another ridge face that came down. And I sat down there that evening and just did a rendition of what I had heard that morning, with all the herd talk, with the mews and the chirps and the bugling. Next thing I know, there are 7 different bulls bugling. There's the 2 on the face to the left, there was 3 on the face to my right, and then there was 2 back up in the canyon. And I just stayed there and kept doing it, and all of a sudden I realized that, holy crap, all 7 of these bulls are descending down onto where I'm at. And of course it's like, okay, are they coming to my calling? And then it's like, no, they're coming into the mineral lick. But the fact that I'm just down there making all this noise, it got everybody excited of, oh man, there's a party going on down there. And that was the birth of the breeding sequence. I didn't realize that what I was doing was basically I was portraying a herd that had a hot cow in it. And that sequence that I was doing created all that excitement. And so it was kind of cool because I sat there and it's kind of like, okay, which one's going to get here first? Am I going left? Am I going right? Am I going up the middle? And because I mean, thermals were blowing in my face. I had the perfect wind. I mean, just everything was great. And one of the dudes on the left was getting the closest, so I peel off over to the left, and I'm heading towards him. And all of a sudden, here's these blow down trees that basically formed an open box, a three-sided box. And right in the middle of that was probably about an 18-foot diameter wallow that had mud just thrown everywhere. And I'm sitting here looking at this going, I have hunted this place for 8 years now, and I have never known that there was a wallow right here. I mean, I knew there was some up on the hillside and back up in, and I would hit those ones back in because I would get up on that face, hit the ridge line, and cook back in. And um, I got to that point over there where I couldn't go anymore because the hillside opened. So I couldn't leave the timber because I would step out in the open. And that bull was right on the edge of the timber, just on the other side of the meadow. And we just screamed at each other. And I mean, I was kind of calling him every name in the book because I wanted him to cross that opening. Um, no clue why he wouldn't come across, and it wasn't until a few years down the road that I realized that he didn't want to come across that opening because he was going to come out in that opening where his pupils were going to change because of the amount of light in the opening, and then he was going to come into the dark timber where I was, and his pupils were going to have to adjust, and I had the advantage. I had the wind, I had everything. The only advantage he had was he was slightly elevated above me, but that was it. So everything else was in my advantage. Um, Again, it took me a few more years of having those kind of encounters to all of a sudden realize, okay, you got to be on the same plane. And so this just kind of shows that the philosophy and the approach to calling will adjust year after year after year after year after year as you learn from your encounters. And if you really pay attention to those counter encounters and gather that information, um, that's that's kind of why I've said, everything that you guys are learning in this course is the evolution that I've gone through over the past 35 years in things that I've learned and things that I've developed. Now, sure. In fact, on one of the ads, there was somebody that made a comment that they were like, $129? No thanks. I can watch enough free videos on YouTube.
Yeah.
Okay, you can. YouTube's a great resource. A lot of great videos. I mean, heck, you guys know I have some videos on there, but it's not going to give you the type of information that you guys are getting inside the course. Nobody. Um, any of the other guys that have courses out there, there's nobody that's going to be given that type of information. So that person there, yeah, they're getting some information on YouTube for free, but they're having to go out in the field and apply that little bit and learn a little bit year after year after year after year after year after year to build that up. So, okay. So, what has my approach evolved into? Again, this is something that changed, kind of talked about the aggressive nature, and so especially the last few years, I have focused more on low audible sounds because I've noticed the elk have changed. They've evolved. I mean, wolves got introduced in Idaho, and now, mind you, that story I was talking about with the seven bulls, that encounter, that was before wolves. Ever since wolves have been reintroduced, that type of bugling activity at that volume doesn't happen in wolf areas. So again, we kind of talked earlier about people not wanting to change, and we may have some members here that they're in that aggressive approach. It's an evolution of hunting and calling, but right now they're in that aggressive. Well, if you're in an area that has wolves or high predator population, or even heavy hunting pressure, that volume aggressive, it's not going to get it done. I mean, you might get lucky. I'm let me change that. You can get it done, but it's going to be a very, very specific situation to where you're going to have to be in the right place at the right time with the bull in the right mindset to make it to happen. So my kind of approach nowadays is I always start off just soft cow calls. That soft. Reason being is reason to start off soft is you always have room to go up. But if I was to grab a reed in a tube and just I don't have much room to go. I can't back up because I've already set the stage. So why not start soft and ramp up? And it's crazy too that with those soft cow calls, man, it's amazing a lot of times that you just hear this just this really little response. And that's kind of what happened in Colorado a few years back. Just got a ooh. And I mean, we were all sitting there contemplating, man, is this even worth it? Do we stay here and work this, or do we move? And I was calling that day, and I said, let's just set up. Let's just set up, and I'll start, doing it in a breeding sequence and starting soft like that and building up the excitement. And man, that turned into be one of the best days that I've ever had calling. That between the two setups, 26 different bulls in one day. It was incredible. But again, it goes back to, if you only have one approach, if you just get there and ring bugles, nothing, and go, we would have never experienced that day. I mean, it was just unreal. It's one of those days as a caller that you just have this huge grin on your face because you are having so much fun. And I mean, there was things that was going on because I'm on top of a ridge. There was things that were happening down in the bottom that I couldn't see. In the first setup, the camera person and the shooter dropped down there and they could see down on the bottom. And there was a little creek and a little pond in there. And after the bull was shot and we recovered the bull, they were like, oh man, it was so awesome. That little pond, there was a group of 4 or 5 raghorn bulls that came in and started splashing in that pond like toddler kids in a kiddie pool where they're just splashing and playing. And they were like, it was the coolest thing to see. And of course, part of me was like, I wanted to see that. But I mean, I was having so much fun because there was multiple bulls down there in the bottom bugling. There was a bull higher up on the ridge that was bugling. We had one back behind me that was bugling. I mean, I was in the middle of all this bugling and all this activity. And after we broke down that bull, three of us went up and rolled across the face onto another ridge, and we set up, and that was the second half of the calling. That same thing, multiple bulls there. Now this one I could see down on the bottom in that lone pine tree in the meadow. I mean, five, six, seven different bulls that took turns coming out of the timber into that meadow and raking the piss. By the time they were done, there wasn't a single limb left on that tree. It looked like somebody stuck a toothpick in the ground. But it was so cool to be able to experience this, and this was one of the coolest things, and I can still see this plain as day. That this bull steps out on the far side of the meadow, and watching him lean his rack back and put his nose up in the air and bugle. And I was like, oh man, that was the coolest thing in the world. And I got on the external cow call, and I started doing those long mews with that hyper, that whiny, that yeah, 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 yeah. And man, he started walking towards us, and yeah, 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 yeah. And then he starts trotting and bugling. And, yeah, 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 yeah. And then he broke into a full dead run, and he was from the bottom there up onto our ridge in about 2 seconds, just like that. So, and one of the guys that was out front shooter caught him by surprise so bad. I didn't know what the heck happened, because I never saw the bull come up, but I heard his bow go off, and I heard that arrow probably tink 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 off six different trees. And all of a sudden, this bull just scalded cash right by me. And I go up to I go up to him, and he's just sitting there, and he's just shaking his head. And I was like, what happened? He goes, that was the most insane thing I've ever seen. He goes, that dude was on the bottom, and as soon as he started running, he goes, I looked down at my bow, looked up, and he was there, 6 feet from me. And I was like, okay, so I heard you shoot. I also heard your arrow tink off quite a few different trees. So let's see if we can find it. And we found the arrow, and it just had a little bit of fatty and some hair on it, no blood. And so I was giving him a bad time, and I'm like, really? I said, so you came to Colorado to perform vasectomies? And he goes, what? And I said, well, look at your arrow. I said, you didn't hit anything. You didn't hit muscle or anything that had blood. So it's only obviously that you skimmed down his belly or something, and you gave that bull a vasectomy. And I mean, he just looked at me like, are you serious? And I mean, I was just joking with them, and we're standing there, and all of a sudden these two guys come walking up the distance where that bull went, and they were like, man, did did one of you guys shoot? Did something happen? Did you spook a bull? And I said, yeah, we got into one bull. You guys know me about stories. You approached me on the mountainside. Yeah, we got into one bull, and the other two guys are looking at me like, they're counting, and I'm like, shut up, shut up. So, so they're like, yeah, we were up there, and we heard all this commotion down here, and we kind of started working down this way, thinking it was a group of bulls having a party, and all of a sudden, this bull just came screaming past us that I think he'll finally check up and stop by the time he reaches California, because he was covering some ground. And I said, well, yeah, that's because so and so over there gave him a vasectomy. And they're like, huh? So, but it's so again, it's working that area and starting small. Even though we went from the first setup with all that activity that then went quiet, when we switched over to the other spot, I didn't carry that excitement that was over there over to here, because there was a far enough distance in between that you basically have to start all over again. And that's one of the tricky things too, that Jim kind of goes to what you were talking about with the patience, because it's really easy to go from that excitement with multiple bulls over on this setup, bull on the ground, and take that adrenaline over here and let that adrenaline and excitement just keep flowing.
Yeah, just keep it at 600 miles an hour. It's easy to do
Uh-huh.
instead of starting over.
No,
Yep.
because I mean your adrenaline's still going, your excitement's still going, but that's the one where you got to turn inside and throttle all that back and start small. Um, you guys have heard me mention before where just act like you're building a fire in camp. You don't start with the full rounds raging 4 foot flames. You start small, build it big. I know Sandy's smirking, going, well, you do start with the full
Yeah,
rounds and 4 foot flames if you put gasoline on it and toss
your
a
diesel
match.
fuel. Yeah,
I was thinking diesel, but
yeah,
yeah,
diesel fuel works great.
Yeah, get that whoosh from the
Yeah,
fire start.
yeah.
So so but yeah, the other thing too is the last few years I kind of talked about the low audible sounds. That's your huffs, your glunking, your raking. Um, you know, because as the popularity of elk hunting grows, everybody wants to get into bugle fests and screaming matches. I do too, just as much as anybody else, because they are a ton of fun. But the reality is, if you want to be successful year after year after year and fill your tag year after year after year, you have to let things develop. And not every setup and not every calling exchange with a bull is going to lead to that screaming match. Now, as you're engaged, that's where again you're continually taking that bull's temperature. So, you know, started off with the soft cow sounds and let's say I've got a bull located and I've moved in and I've set up, and that's the other thing that is kind of evolved too. Um, I want to get as close as possible to a bull before I set up. Man, early on, I would set up 250 yards away and start calling. But mind you, too, it was a lot different then because there wasn't that many people out there calling. And especially back where we were 7, 8 miles back in, the only human encounters those guys had were with us. There really wasn't. I mean, once in a while we would get another group back in there, but not very often. I mean, you're talking miles and miles along canyon with, side draws that we had to ourselves, nobody around. And so it was a lot different that you could set up farther out and pull them. But again, as I kind of evolved and adjusted on that, and okay, I want to get as close as possible because that's where I learned that, if my effective range is 40 yards. If I set up at 100 yards, I only have to pull that bull 60 yards to get him within my effective range. If I'm 200 yards out, I have to pull him 160 yards. And so the chances of pulling him 60 yards versus 160 yards, your odds go up dramatically. So as close as you can get. I mean, even if you could get 75 yards or 80 yards from him, man, now you're only talking about pulling that bull 40, 50 yards from where he's at, which can be done. And that's where a lot of these low audible sounds come into play because now I'm not intimidating him. I'm not screaming over the top, but that's where I was talking about continuing to take that bull's temperature. So, okay, I started with soft cow sounds. Now I'm going to mix in a bull. Most people, when they want to mix in a bull, they're going to go right to a bugle immediately. Me, I start with raking or huffs, but usually it's raking first and then back to my cow sounds, and then maybe I might introduce some huffs and grunts. The reason with the raking and the huffs and grunts is they're non-confrontational. They're non-intimidating. They actually create a sense of curiosity. And that's where, so taking that bull's temperature, I'm doing some cow sounds and maybe he bugles once every couple of minutes. But man, I start raking, and all of a sudden, as soon as I start raking, man, he's bugling more volume, more aggressively. It's like, okay, interesting. He sounded off periodically with the cow sounds, but as soon as I start raking, he gets more volume. He gets a sharper bugle. Okay, now that's kind of telling me that I might have a little bit older age class bull that's kind of territorial, and maybe I've moved into a spot. So again, I started small. I still have room to move up. So again, mix in those cow sounds again. Then I'm going to do some kind of huffs and grunts and maybe a little whine, because that huff, grunt, and whine, again, it's non-threatening. See how he responds. If he responds with more aggression, then that's when you can go, okay, he's getting more aggressive. Now I'm going to match his aggressive level. And we're going to see where it goes. If I match his aggression level and he decelerates on his answer, then I know that I've got to keep it down on this register. I can't go up here. I got to stay down here. But if I come up and match his level, then he rises again, then that just tells me I can rise again. If at any time, if he rises and I rise and he decelerates, I've hit my ceiling. I know now back down here is my ceiling on aggressiveness, on how I'm bugling to him. If I'm bugling over the top of him, different things that I'm doing like that. But that's how you take that bull's temperature. Same thing. If I do cow sounds and he bugles, and I introduce that bull with raking and he decelerates, okay, we're leaving a bull out of it. This is going to be a cow sound interaction only. But that's also where you start needing to pay attention, and this is where going through the different elk sounds. Okay, I'm doing cow sounds. What type of bugle is he giving back to me? Is he giving me a roundup bugle that's asking me to come to him? And that's where this philosophy of change too is studying that vocalizations. Okay, is that bull asking me to come to him? Is he asking me to stay away? How is he responding? Is is it to the cow sounds or is it to the bugles? Is he raising his aggression level? And these are all things that you can do with just within a matter of minutes of paying attention to how he's responding. Once you have that information, and in fact, I've been sitting there with the guys during the information gathering, taking that bull's temperature. And as soon as I have that information, there's been times where I've looked at the guys and went, that's a dead bull walking. We're killing him. And 90+% of the times, that's what happens. So, because once you have that dialed in and it's like, okay, you're mine. I know it's like when you're out fishing, and you're trying different things, and man, all of a sudden, you put on a yellow and black rooster tail. First cast, man, hit. Second cast, hit. It's like, okay, I found exactly. And then for the rest of the day, you're just focusing on tossing that black and yellow rooster tail. Same thing with this too. Now you know exactly with that bull. Now here's the frustrating part. Maybe you didn't choose the best setup, and we're not going to get into setups tonight because that's a whole other topic just by itself. But maybe you chose a poor setup that you didn't get a shot opportunity on that bull. Well, here's the cool thing. Okay, it didn't work out on this one. We got him into 50 yards. Positive, good encounter. We'll take the lessons learned. Our setup was poor, and we'll move on to the next. And man, that's the cool thing. Then you get another bull that lights off, do that informational gathering. Okay, we're going to choose a little wiser on the setup this time, and we're going to make it happen this time. But that's where those multiple shot opportunities come in. Not every encounter ends up in a shot. So, but to us, calling in a bull at 40 yards or less, that's a successful call in. Now, whether it be brush that blocked vitals or something, it's never going to be perfect every time. But getting that philosophy and getting that approach to where you're taking that bull's temperature and you're throwing little nuggets out and kind of tempting him to see what he's going to respond to. So basically, you're fishing, you're throwing different things out at him. So, wow, it's been an hour already, guys. Time flies when you're talking elk hunting on Valentine's Day.
That's right.
So,
You know it.
yeah. So that kind of explains, kind of my philosophy and my approach is the biggest thing is taking that bull's temperature. Instead of you having a predetermined approach or a predetermined idea in your head of how things are going to go, be flexible. Take that bull's temperature, because I can guarantee if you take that bull's temperature, find his hot button, and then exploit that hot button, you are going to have so many more calling encounters. And even if it's just a cow routine, you can still get a lot of bugling activity. And that's where it's fun, because that dude, especially if he's doing the roundup bugle and he's asking you to come to him, he's gonna accelerate the urgency in his demand, and his bugle is going to get more intense. He's still saying the same thing. He's still saying that roundup bugle. He's still saying, come to me. But his vocal level, he's just getting louder about it. He's getting more adamant about it. And that's where, you can move towards him a little bit, and then you stand your ground. It's like, 80-20 rule, dude. I came 20% of the way to you. If you really want this, you're going to come 80% to me. I'm not that kind of girl that's going to come all the way and give it all and make it easy on you. You're going to work for this a little bit. And I mean, that is where it's so cool, because you will hear so many different bull vocalizations on that. You will hear a bull that's screaming roundup bugles. You will hear a bull that is glunking, that is huffs and grunts, and just, you're going to hear a lot of different sounds. And that's where you can really hear those sounds plus watch his behavior. You can gain so much knowledge on that, but also too, those are going to give you so much more confidence, and it's just stinking fun. That's the bottom line. It's fun. So, okay, what do you guys think?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I pulled a bull one time in. My friend Dave was sitting out. We were in camp in the evening with a fire going, and there was a bull screaming. And Dave says to me, "Get your tube." So I got my tube, came out, and I bugled at him, and he got aggressive with me. I said, "Okay, but just what you said." I got aggressive with him. He got more aggressive. I got more aggressive with him. He came right into camp with a campfire going. We was sitting around camp. He's right there. My friend Dave goes, "Jesus, you can call some elk."
Yeah, that's kind of like that time we were back in on that area that we hunted. We were at camp number 2, so we were 8 miles back in, and we had a wall tent tucked into the pine trees, and then just outside of those trees was a great big meadow that then went up into some quaking aspens, and then a great big rock slide above that. And I I mean, elk would flood into this meadow at night, and I mean, we'd be laying in the tent just listening to a rut fest out in that meadow. I mean, it would be tough to sleep some nights. I mean, yeah, poor us, right? Tough to sleep with
That's
multiple
my
elk.
friend Dave. Yeah, I can't sleep because the elk screaming all night long. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but there used to be one across the canyon and across the creek out on this face that he would never come over and join this group. But man, he would sure stay over there and scream. And only two of us had gone back into camp that night. The third person was coming in the next day, and the two of us that were in there had shot bulls. In fact, we got two bulls in one day, a couple of days before that. And two of us had headed back in because we were like, oh, we'll just go sit on the carcasses and see if a bear comes in, waiting for the third person to come in. And we were sitting there, we hadn't gone to bed yet, and that dude over on the face pipes off. And the guy that was there with me, he's like, bet you $100 you can't pull him over. I'm like, really? All right, it's on. So again, I grabbed an open reed cow call and I just went out in that meadow, and I just started with just some mews, but then I went into that long mew again with that pleading. I mean, guys, that long mew with that pleading whine is so stinking deadly and effective. But I did about 5 minutes of just moving through that meadow out there, and he bugled a few times and then he shut up. And I'm like, well, okay, maybe I need to walk back to camp and pony up. It's getting late. It's time to go jump in the sleeping bag. And so I walked back over to where the tent is, and the guy just had a smirk on his face, and he's like, "Told you." And I was like, "It's not over yet." And he goes, "What do you mean? The guy hasn't bugled for 10 minutes. He shut up. It's over." And so we go in, and I mean, no sooner we climbed in the sleeping bag, just right outside the tent. The reason that guy went quiet is because he was picking himself down off the face across the creek and over to us. He screamed probably 15 yards from the front of our tent. And then he went out in that meadow and he spent the next 3.5 hours pacing back and forth every inch of that meadow, just screaming, looking for that cow. So,
$100 in your pocket, right?
no, I never got paid for it. So,
Figures.
so but it's one of those things that I didn't do a big extravagant calling sequence. I mean, I just told a little story and then just went silent. So that kind of shows right there. If you're a solo hunter, man, you have that. You're doing this routine, and that dude's bugling. If he's bugling and then he shuts up for no reason, that's a good indicator that he's coming into you. You need to go quiet and start working towards him, get the wind in your favor, and find a shooting lane because there's a good chance he's coming. So, God, I could keep going. There's so many other directions and stories and things we can go on this. So, all right, those of you that are watching the replay, if you have any questions about philosophy or approach, put them in the comments down below this area or below this video, and I'll take some of those questions and we'll morph those into a part two of calling philosophy and approach, because there's so many more avenues that we can go on this, to where we can get into situational, all that kind of stuff. So, all right, so we're going to wrap this up for tonight. So in 2 weeks, we're going back to e-scouting. So a couple of new tools I found on FatMap that I'm going to introduce you guys to and show you. And I was bummed about FatMap. Do you guys remember that video I did the couple of years ago that had the hiking ring? Do you guys remember that?
The what?
The hiking ring, where you could drop a pin and then you could adjust, how, and that ring would change, so you could see exactly how much ground you could cover. that is no longer a free tool. That is only available in the paid subscription for FatMap. So we lost that tool. But FatMap now has a route planning tool that is really cool. You put it into 3D mode to where you're tilted, and you can use this, and man, it'll follow the terrain. And by the time you're done, man, it'll tell you exactly how many hours it's going to take you to hike that, how many miles it is, how many feet in elevation you're going to gain, how much feet in elevation you're going to lose, and it's kind of a cool tool. So I
Oh,
figured in 2 weeks we're going to go back to e-scouting, and we're going to play with some of these new tools, and we're going to go scout some areas, and we're going to pick a new area. We're going to scout it. We're going to talk about what I look for, and we're also going to use that route tool to establish a base camp in this area, and we're going to set 3 or 4 different hunt loops and routes to help you plan new areas. So hi guys, appreciate appreciate you guys tuning in. As always, keep calling, keep practicing. More importantly, though, have fun. I'm going to be on the road tomorrow to Salt Lake City, Utah for the Hunt Expo. I will be doing some videos down there, and I may actually do a couple of live broadcast with some companies and kind of some cool new products that hit the market. So keep an eye out for YouTube lives. So all right, guys, thanks for tuning in tonight. Appreciate you guys giving up a little bit of time on your Valentine's Day. So go make it up to your wives. I'm sure they look a heck of a lot better than I do, and you probably want to look at them more than you do me. So, all right, guys, we'll see you guys in 2 weeks.
see you, Sandy.